everybody, how are you doing today? So we are discussing our next chapter, is chapter 7, and we're going to talk about more fallacies. Last week we were talking about fallacies, and the week before we were talking about fallacies, and we're talking about it again today. So have fun. They're playing band. Students are going to recognize several types of fallacies and confuse the qualities of a person making claim with qualities of the claim. Recognize fallacy involved in thinking that the claim is refuted because of its origin. We're going to recognize fallacies that represent the opponent's position. We are going to recognize the fallacies that erroneously affect considerations to all the two options. We're going to recognize fallacious claims that only action relevant or irreversibly led to another. Recognize arguments that place the burden of proof on the wrong party. Recognize the problem as arguments that rely on a claim that itself is the issue. You have ad hom fallacy. That one we hear a lot. That one was featured in the movie Legally Blonde, the first Legally Blonde movie where she goes to Harvard and she talks about ad hominem fallacy in her class. So ad hominem fallacy is the most common of all mistakes in reasoning. The fallacy rests is the confusion between the qualities of a person making a claim and the qualities of the claim itself. Claim to be understood broadly here as including beliefs, opinions, positions, arguments, proposals, and so forth. Parker is ingenious person, but he does not follow the Parker's opinion itself is ingenious. To think what it would be to confuse the content of Parker's claim with Parker himself. Or let's suppose you are listening to somebody and your teacher, perhaps whom you regard as a bit strange or even a little weird. Would it follow a car if your teacher drives as strange or weird? Obviously not. Likewise, it would not follow that some specific proposal that the teacher has put forth is strange or weird. A proposal made by an oddball is an oddball's proposal, but it does not follow that oddball proposal. We must not confuse the qualities of a person making a claim with the qualities of the claim itself. We must commit to ad hominem fallacy when we think that considerations about a person refute his or her assertions. Ad hominem is Latin for the man, indicating what's not really the subject matter is being addressed for the person. The most common varieties of ad hominem fallacy are as follows. The personal attack ad hominem. Johnson has such and such negative feature, therefore his claim, belief, opinion, theory, proposal stands refuted. This is a formula for a personal attack ad hominem fallacy. The name personal attack is self-explanatory because attributing a negative feature to Johnson is attacking him personally. Now there's negative features that we might attribute to a person. Perhaps Johnson is said to be ignorant or stupid. Maybe he's charged with being self-serving or feathering his own nest. Perhaps he's accused of being a racist or a sexist or a fascist or a cheat or being cruel and uncaring and soft in communities, taking pleasure in strangling songbirds. The point of remembering the shortcomings of a person is not equivalent to shortcomings in the person's ideas, proposals, theories, opinions, claims, and arguments, but it's not consistent with what's being said as credibility. Indeed, facts about the source of the claim correctly make us skeptical about the claim, but we should not ordinarily conclude what's false on the account. Now, it's true that there's exceptional circumstances we can imagine. Some feature of a person might logically imply what a person says is false, but the circumstances are far-fetched. Johnson's claim is false because he has paid a lie in the matter. Might qualify as example. Johnson's claim is false because he has too been drugged, makes him say only false things. Would qualify too, but such situations are rare. True, when we have doubts about credibility of a source, we must be careful before we accept the claim that's a source. But the doubts are rarely sufficient grounds in the outright rejection of the claim. No matter what claim Johnson might make, no matter what his faults might be, we are rarely justified in rejecting and claim him false simply because he has those faults. They believe Boy Scouts' position as homosexuality was objectionable, but they gave no heed to the person's objection about using state money to fun displays about sodomy in people's capital. That's California Assemblyman Bill Leonard said that. The inconsistency of it ad hominem. Moore's claim is consistent that somebody else, Moore said, has done. Therefore, the claim, belief, opinion, theory, proposal stands refuted. This is a formula for the consistency ad hominem, and you encounter the versions of a fallacy all the time. An example of a 2008 Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were both varying the Democratic nomination for the presidency, after Obama was quoted as saying he had no intention to take it away. We had ad hominem. The idea behind ad hominem fallacy is to point to the person making a claim and accuse him or her of some flaw, evil deed, or negative feature. By indicating the person behind the claim, the accuser hopes to refute the claim. But while some fact or the author is a claim, it may affect his or her credibility. And it cannot itself demonstrate what the claim is false. Clinton's campaign pointed out the 1996 questionnaire Obama had supported banning manufacture, sale, and possession of handguns. And that showed his new claim about intending to take away folks' guns was not really true. Again, the fact was that opinion was expressed in 1996, and different one in 2008 is not grounds for rejecting the later as false. Although accusations and doing a flip-flop are standard in political campaigns, it's important to look beneath the surface to see how different the two positions really are, and whether that might be a good reason for changing one's mind. The fact that people change one's minds has no bearing on the truth of what's said either before or after. Sometimes a person's claim seems inconsistent, not with previous statements, but with another person's behavior. For example, Johnson might tell us to be more ingenuous, and we know Johnson himself is stingy and can be. Well, Johnson may be a hypocrite, but we have a guilty on inconsistency of ad hominem fallacy. We regarded Johnson to be guilty of inconsistency of ad hominem fallacy. We regard Johnson's stinginess as hypocrisy, as grounds for rejecting what he says. This type of reasoning is where we reject that somebody says because of he seems inconsistent with what he or she does. Even the Latin name tu cate means you too. This version of inconsistency of ad hominem often boils down to nothing more than saying you too or you do it too. If a smoker urges another smoker to give up a habit, the second smoker commits inconsistency ad hominem if he says, well, you do it too. Parker's circumstances are such and such, therefore the claim, belief, opinion, theory, proposal stands refuted. This is a formula for consubstantial ad hominem. For example, would be, well, you can forget what Father Hennessy says about dangers of abortion because Father Hennessy is a priest and priests are equipped to hold such views. You can see how that's ad hominem. Positions at the well can be thought as ad hominem in advance. If somebody pumps the poison down your well, you don't drink from it. Similarly, A poisons your mind and B relates to unfavorable information about B and may be inclined to reject what B says to you. While positioning is easier to arrange what you might think, you might suppose the position someone's thinking about Mrs. Jones. Okay, so that's an example. Hey, maybe you have no better sense, but I personally would not accept anything as news adding from the fat, drug-addicted loudmouth. Positive ad hominem fallacies. An ad hominem fallacy then is committed if we rebuke a person on the basis of considerations that logically imply that a person rather than his or her claims. Strictly speaking, if we automatically transfer the positive or favorable attributes of a person, what he or she says, that mistake is reasoning. As well, the fact that you think Moore is clever does not logically entitle you to conclude that any specific opinion of Moore is clever. We have genetic fallacy occurs when we try to refute a claim or urge others to do so on the basis of the origin of the history. If this sounds like we've been talking about ad hominem section, is no surprise. The genetic fallacy is often considered to be a blanket category for all fallacies that mistake can attack, a source of attack on the claim in question. Taken this way, all versions of ad hominem, poisoning the well, and so forth are also example as genetic fallacy. In our treatment, we reserve the right of the term genetic fallacy for cases. There isn't a person who's disbarred the source of a claim, but some other kind of entity, a club, a political party, an industrial group, or even entire epoch. The example is the later would be attempting to refute a belief in God because that belief first rose superstition times, and we had a few natural explanations or even events like storms, earthquakes, and so on. We have heard people declare the U.S. Constitution is invalid because it was allegedly drafted to protect the interests of property owners. Just another example of genetic fallacy. All right. And you have straw man. Straw man is easier if we knock over the real one. That's the reason fallacy has a name. We get a straw man fallacy when a speaker or writer distorts, exaggerates, or otherwise misrepresents opponent's position. In such a case, the position attributed to opponent that isn't a real one. It's a position made of straw and thus more easily criticized and rejected. Here's a simple example. Imagine our editor's wife says, Mark, it's time for you to get busy and clean out the garage. He protests. What, again? Do I have to clean out the garage every blasted day? And thus, he is attributing his wife to much less defensible position than really one, since anybody would agree that he should clean the garage every day. Here's a real-life example of a newspaper column by George Will. Senator Lindsey Graham believes that some borrowing is appropriate to make stakeholders of future generations, which will be the biggest beneficiaries of personal accounts. But substantially reducing the borrowing would deny Democrats' ability to distinguish as fiscal responsibility in their opposition to personal accounts, which really is noted in the reliance to enable people to become less dependent on the government. To be in favor of a government position is to help people who need them far cry from being in favor of keeping people in those programs as long as possible. The second point regarding the example is one that's part of a straw man fallacy, is the writer is presuming to read the minds of the entire group of people. How could he possibly know the real reasons Democrats oppose personal accounts if they're claiming something entirely different? This is sometimes called reliance on the unknown fact. Strawman and elder competition. In 2005, the political group USA Next ran an ad attacking the AARP, nationwide organization of retired persons. The ad made it appear that AARP stood for gay marriage, and in fact, the organization never take a stand on the subject. Charlie Jarvis, chairman of the USA Next, defended the ad by saying the AARP affiliate in Ohio come out against same-sex marriage ban in that state. To claim that it was the same as saying AARP endorses gay marriage is a good example of straw man fallacy. So you can see how a lot of people use this when they're doing ads, campaigns, when they're advertising. Conservative will oppose tightening emission standards for sulfur dioxide, and liberal will accuse him of wanting to relax the standards. Your Democratic Congresswoman will say that she opposes cutting taxes, and her Republican opponent will accuse her of wanting to raise taxes. The ad hominem fallacy attempts to refute a claim on the basis of considerations that logically apply to the source. The straw man fallacy attempts to refute a claim by altering it so it may seem patiently false or even ridiculous. False dilemmas. Fallacy occurs when you limit considerations only to alternatives to other alternatives may be available. Like strawman fallacy, it's encountered all the time. You may want it to drill for oil in Alaskan National Wildlife Reserve. You may prefer letting the Iranians dictate the price of oil, or take it to this example. Guess we're going to have to cut back expenditures on the social programs this year. Why is that? Well, we either do it or we live with the high deficit, and that's something we can't allow. Hey, Kilograms maintains that either we live with the high deficit or we cut social programs, and therefore we can't live with the high deficit. We have to cut the social programs. But the reasoning works only cutting social programs is the only alternative in the high deficit. Of course, that's not the case. Taxes may be raised or military spending cut, for example. Another example. Teresa and I both endorse the idea of allowing prayer in public schools, don't we, Teresa? Teresa says, I never said such a thing. Daniel says, hey, I don't know that you were an atheist. Here's Daniel's argument amounts that this, either you endorse prayer in public schools or you're an atheist. Therefore, because you don't endorse the school prayers, you must be an atheist. But the person does not have to be an atheist to not endorse school prayer. Straw man may be used as part of a false dilemma. A person who wants to accept X may not ignore the alternating besides Y, but exaggerate or distort Y. In the words, the person leaves only one reasonable alternative. So here's an example of false dilemma by President Obama on an interview of March 17, 2010 with Brett Baier of Fox News. Obama says, what can I tell you is a vote that's taken in the House will be a vote for healthcare reform and that people vote yes, whatever form it takes. That's going to be a vote for healthcare reform. And Breyer breaks in a moment. Brett, let me finish. If they don't, they vote against. They're going to be voting against healthcare reform and they're going to be voting in favor of status quo. Then which is it going to be? This or this? Vote no proposed zoning law this Western city. And then you have the perfectionist fallacy. A particular subspecies of false common rhetoric employs something as perfectionist fallacy. If policy Y, X will not meet the goals as well and we'd like to meet, then policy X should be rejected. The principle downgrades that X is simply because it isn't perfection. It's a version of false dilemma because it says in effect either the policy is perfect or else it must reject it. An excellent example as a perfectionist fallacy comes from the National Football League experience with instant replay rule, which allows an off-field official to review the video recordings of a play to determine whether the on-field official ruling was correct. To help the replay official, recordings from several angles can be reviewed and the play runs in slow motion. All right, hold on, I'm trying to get this PowerPoint. This is reviewing the fallacies. The ad hominem fallacy. The ad hominem fallacy rests on the confusion between the qualities of a person making a claim, quality of the claim itself. It's a rhetorical device that attacks the arguer instead of the argument. A proposal made by oddball is an oddball's proposal, but does not follow the oddball proposal. A pattern of fallacies reasoning is we refuse to accept another's argument because there's something about a person we don't like or we disapprove. Example, are you really going to believe her about librarian salaries not being excessive? Or you have to know herself as a librarian? A pattern of fallacies reasoning is a sort. I reject your claim because you act consistently with it yourself. Or you can't take that claim now because you have to pass reject it. The double standard argument is actually inconsistency of ad hominem. Did you ever notice how people in favor of abortion demand that same people are against death penalty? Example, this really gripes me to see Bill Clinton talking about cigarette smoking as a big contributor to public health costs. How can we trust him? Even himself admits to smoking cigars. That's inconsistency ad hominem. Substantial ad hominem, attempting to discredit a person's claim by referring to a person's circumstances. Example, of course, the task force on crime is going to conclude that crime is a way up. If they conclude it's on the way down, they'd have to disband the task force, wouldn't they? This is circumstantial ad hominem. Example, of course, it can't be a legitimate proposal. They're just trying to get the city council to pass regulation that'll stir up some business for them. Positioning the well. Positioning the well can be thought as an ad hominem in advance. Positioning the well. Example, I wouldn't take a course from anyone in Poly's side department if I were you. They're all anti-US, ultra-liberal types. At least that's what I hear. Poisoning the well. Example, the next speaker is going to speak in favor of idea, but she works for the gun lobby, so don't even bother listening to what she says. Genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy occurs when they try to refute a claim on the basis of origin or history. Rejecting a position because it's supported by a group you don't like is genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy, you can't trust the arguments you find in the magazine, is well known as a right-wing apologist for wealthy. Genetic fallacy, I don't think postmodern expressionism is a decent art. It's another style spawned by the East Coast art establishment, and frankly, I'm tired of that group's dictating the rest of the art world. Positive ad hominem fallacies. If we automatically transfer the positive and favorable attributes of a person to what he or she says, that's a mistaken reasoning as well. Positive ad hominem fallacies. Example, the fact that you view NRA represents all that good proper does not enable you to infer with a specific proposal with NR good proper. Positive ad hominem fallacies. Example, the fact that you think your mom is clever does not logically entitle you to conclude any specific opinion of your mom's clever. Straw man fallacy. The straw man fallacy happens when you refute position or claim by distorting or oversimplifying or representing it, all while ignoring the person's actual position. Straw man fallacy. Gays in the military, yes, maybe you in favor, including everyone except the white Anglo accent males with adolescent personalities, but that's not me. Straw man fallacy. Do I want the police department to take charge of writing parking tickets? You mean, do I want to get shot if I pull up next to a fire hydrant? What do you think? False dilemma fallacy. The false dilemma fallacy occurs when you limit considerations to only two alternatives, although other alternatives may be available. A straw man is often used as part of a false dilemma. False dilemma fallacy. Overheard. I don't know why Barbara don't go out with me. She must think I'm too intense for her. The false dilemma fallacy. Again, gays in the military. Either let them in or keep them all minorities. Take your choice. I'm letting them in. This alternative is ridiculous. Perfectionist fallacy. The perfectionist fallacy is subspecies of false dilemma, a common rhetorical ploy. This is a principle downgrades policy X simply because it isn't perfect. Example, no, I don't believe we ought to restate the death penalty in this state. Doing it isn't going to prevent all crime, and you know it. Example, don't stay in the army. You were ROTC instead of going to one of those academies. That's what I mean. They might promote you a while, but you'll never get above lieutenant colonel. The line drawing fallacy. Another version of the false dilemma is called the line drawing fallacy. The fallacy of insisting that the line must be drawn at some point when in fact is not necessarily that's drawn at all. The line drawing fallacy. All this talk about secondhand smoke causing cancer, I don't get it. How does it happen? When does it happen? The first time you take a breath in a smoky room, the second time you never know to pin down exactly. Example, what do you mean broke my curfew? All I did was walk to the curb. You wouldn't cite me if I stood in the porch, would you? And if I just stepped off the porch, that wouldn't be any different. So what's magical about the curb? Slippery slope. A form of fallacious reasoning which is assumed that some event must eventually fall from another, but which argument is made for inventability? Example, gays in the military. If we allow that, the next time we'll be letting women into men's barracks. And the next thing you know, women, men, gays, everyone, they'll be all showering together and sleeping in the same bunks. Get real. Misplacing the burden of proof. Misplacing the burden of proof occurs when the burden of proof is placed on the wrong side of the issue. Continue with misplacing the burden of proof. The less initial plausibility a claim has, the greater the burden of proof we place on somebody who asserts that claim. 2. Other things being equal, the burden of proof falls automatically on those supporting the affirmative side of an issue rather than those supporting the negative side. When somebody claims we should believe in such and such because nobody has proved it isn't so, we have a subtype known as appeal to ignorance. Special circumstances like court or contracts will specify where burden of proof lies, so there's no doubts or confusion about who needs to prove what. Example, I beg to differ, officer, but sometimes you people go overboard talking about the dangers of fast driving. If you can't prove that there's actually a child near the street right now, and that child would have stepped out in front of the car, then I'll grant you that going 55 was dangerous. Example, preferential treatment is hiring is something we must support after all. Can you think of a reason why we shouldn't? Begging the question. We're all guilty of begging the question when we ask our audience to accept premises that are as controversial as conclusions we're arguing and controversial as same grounds. Begging the question. Example, the ACLU, yeah, I know about them, and I don't like them very much. They're the ones who furnish the free lawyers for criminals. Begging the question. Example, I don't believe a murderer ought to be allowed to live. No way. Murderers have fortified the right to live because anyone who murders a right person has lost the right. All right. Okay, it's time for a video. Can you outsmart a troll by thinking like one?
Tourists. Tourists that turn into scientists. Tourists taking photos that are analyzed by AI. So researchers can help life underwater flourish.
Your town is holding a mayoral election, and the stakes have never been higher. The outcome will decide the fate of a local movement to rely on 100% renewable energy. One mayoral nominee, Joanna B. Green, is a champion of this movement, while the other, Stanis Quo, staunchly opposes it. He's announced he'll use whatever tactics are necessary to win the election. As the municipal cybersecurity expert, you're on high alert. Election day is near, and you suspect that Quo will begin pushing false information to swing the election in his favor. Your job is to inoculate the townspeople against false information before the election. One of the most effective ways to tackle disinformation is to encourage people to think about the strategies used by those who create and spread it. This might seem counterintuitive and potentially dangerous. But as long as you don't create a how-to manual, active inoculation is an effective option. A study conducted in 2019 used an online game to train people to think like a disinformation producer. When the participants were next shown the disinformation, their perception of its reliability dropped significantly. But before you can teach your own townspeople, you need to figure it out for yourself. What strategies would you employ if you were status quo? In order to launch a successful disinformation campaign, you must use evocative and convincing content that will spread quickly and create confusion. It'll also help to take advantage of confirmation bias. People are intuitively more inclined to believe information that supports a worldview they already have. Many young voters in your town are in favor of transitioning to renewable energy and sympathize with green. Rather than trying to change their minds, Quo will likely focus on suppressing the youth vote. If you were him, how would you start? You might create fake user accounts to spread disinformation on popular social media platforms. You could even make one that impersonates a trusted figure. From these accounts, you can deliver highly shareable, engaging, visual content like memes relating to the imminent election. That's how you would like to go about spreading disinformation, but what kind of disinformation would be effective in manipulating young green supporters? First, you could direct people to vote via text, a web page, or an app, none of which are viable voting platforms in your town. The claim isn't too far-fetched. An encrypted digital platform could actually seem safer to young people than the traditional ballot system. Perhaps you could also tell them that the voting day is one day after it actually is. You could then pair this approach with a more emotion-driven one. How about vilifying green and appealing to the young voters' values? You want to share information that taps into people's sense of civic duty and makes them feel that the election depends on their sharing it as widely as possible. Your fake accounts could circulate false accusations that Green takes money from local, somehow corrupt renewable energy facilities, treats her staff poorly, or abuses stray kittens for fun. These inflammatory claims could lead people to question Green's integrity as a leader and even initiate further conspiracy theories. After you've introduced these disinformation campaigns, your fake users should keep repeating them so they stick in people's minds. Finally, media coverage would further spread your claims and give them perceived legitimacy. You could message a few local journalists asking whether these rumors are true and express your concerns. By the time an article comes out debunking the rumors, people's experiences of the truth will have become so warped that convincing them otherwise will be difficult. A disinformation campaign like this would pit citizens against one another and exploit their values and fears. You can't personally protect each individual from disinformation, but you can equip them with the insights you have and encourage them to pass these tools further along. After all, community organizing is what elections often call for. Want to keep honing your misinformation spotting super skills?
Okay. All right, let me go ahead and get the next one ready. Okay. All right. Okay, go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Okay, about 3 more minutes. The next PowerPoint's ready. All right. 2 more minutes. There's a line drawing fallacy. Hey, I hope you had a good 5-minute break. We have the line drawing fallacy. Another version of this false dilemma is called a line drawing fallacy. An example comes from the much publicized Rodney King case, in which 4 Los Angeles police officers were acquitted of charges of using excessive force when they beat King during arrest. After the trial, one of the jurors indicated the argument like the following finally convicted her. At least one juror said not guilty. Everybody agrees the first time one of the officers struck King with a nightstick to not confiscate excessive force. Therefore, we're able to conclude excessive force was indicated used, and somebody during the course of the beating during the King was hit 50 times. There must have been a moment, particularly blow, in which the force became excessive. Since there's no point to excess to determine the useful force, the warranted excessive, we are forced to conclude that it did not become excessive any time during the beating, and the officers did not have excessive force. We saw the same thing when it came to Floyd more recently. So people or lawyers, if they are immediately sick, they feel ashamed of what they're witnessing. False dilemma. These jurors accepted line drawing fallacy, fallacy of insisting that there's a line must be drawn at some precise point at which the fact is necessary that such precise line is drawn. To see how it works, we can see this other example. Clearly, it's impossible for a person who is not rich to become rich by giving her $1. But equally clearly, we give our lucky person $50 million one time very quickly, obviously. Maybe we're a machine to deal with them where we're rich. According to the line drawing argument, however, we cannot point to the precise dollar that makes her rich, and she can never get rich no matter how much money she's given. The problem, of course, is that concepts referred to by rich and excessive force you have slippery slope. We've all heard people make claims of this sort. We let X happen. First thing you know, Y will be happening. This sort one is a slippery slope. Such claims are fallacious when it comes to the fact that no reason to think X will lead to Y. Sometimes X and Y will be the same kind of thing, or it can bear some kind of similarity to one another, but doesn't mean one will eventually lead to another. Opponents of handgun control sometimes use slippery slope argument, saying that when laws to register handguns are passed, it will eventually lead to making ownership of any kind gun legal. This fallacious is there is no reason to think that the first kind of law will lead eventually to the second kind. If it's up to the person who offers the slippery slope claim to show why the first action will lead to the second. This also argue that one will not experiment with certain drugs because experimentation is apt to lead to serious addiction or independence. In the case of drugs are known to be addictive, there's no fallacy present and likelihood of progression is clear. 8 billion down the tube. 8 billion down utility rate payers money and 20 years of effort to be squandered if this resolution is defeated. The fact that we spent money on it already doesn't make a good idea. The other version is slippery slope occurs when somebody claims we must have continued a certain course of action simply because we already began that course. It was said during the Vietnam War that because the United States had already sent troops to Vietnam, it was necessary to send troops to support the first ones. Unless there's a reason supplied to show the first step must be lead to another, this is fallacy. Displacing the burden of truth. Moore asked Parker, say, did you know that? If you rub white wine on your head, your gray hair will turn dark again? Parker says, of course, say blindly. Let's suppose May says blindly, how do you know it won't work? Moore's question's odd because the burden of proof rests on him, not on Parker. And Moore misplaced the burden of proof on Parker, and that makes it a fallacy. Misplacing a burden of proof occurs when the burden of proof is placed on the wrong side of the issue. This is common rhetorical technique, and sometimes you have to be in the toast to spot it. People are frequently tricked into thinking that they have to prove the opponent's claim wrong, when in fact the opponent would be proving the claim is right. For example, back in 2003, you heard people trying their darnest to prove that we shouldn't go to war with Iraq. And the context, the burden of proof rests on those who think we should go to war. Initial plausibility in chapter 4, which was a couple weeks ago, we said that there's more claim coincides with the background information, the greater initial plausibility. The general rule is most governs the placement of the burden of proof is simply this. The less initial plausibility a claim has, the greater burden of proof we place on somebody who asserts to the claim. This is just good sense, of course. We're quite naturally less skeptical about the claim that Charlie's now famous 87-year-old grandmother drove a boat across Lake Michigan than actually the claim about swam across Lake Michigan. Those are some examples. Here's a cartoon, but there's no proof that they didn't dance either. Moore says, the car won't start. Parker says, yeah, I know, it's a problem with the ignition. Moore says, what makes you think that? Parker says, what makes you think it isn't? We have a version of burden of proof known as appeal to ignorance. We have innocent proven guilty. We must point out that sometimes there are specific reasons why the burden of proof is placed entirely on one side. The obvious case in point is criminal court, where it's prosecutor's job to prove guilt. The defense is not required to prove innocence and must only try to keep the prosecution from succeeding in its attempt to prove guilt. We are, as we say, innocent till proven guilty. As a matter of fact, it is possible that more trials might come from the correct conclusion. The guilty get convicted and the innocent acquitted if the burden of proof equally shared between prosecution and defense. But we have widely decided that we must make a mistake. We'd rather it be letting a guilty person go free than convicting an innocent person. Rather than being a fallacy, then this loop-sided placement of the burden of proof is how we guarantee the fundamental right, the presumption of the innocent. And that's the saying, innocent till proven guilty. Here's an example, public attitudes for police. About 50% of Americans rate the police as either good or excellent at solving crimes. Why is the percentage higher? Why do you think racial groups differ so greatly in their attitudes toward police? Maybe police selection. What do you think is the most important qualities for police officers to have and why? How much formal education do you think police officers should have? Why? Discretion. Many states have mandatory arrest laws that require police officers to arrest any suspect that's battered a spouse or domestic partner. Do you support mandatory arrest laws in domestic cases? Why or why not? Why do you think generally they don't like to respond to domestic violence calls? There's much debate on how much control should be placed on decisions of police officers in arrest situation, how much control would be placed on them and why? What are some of the arguments in favor and opposing the reduction of police discretion? Explain the concept driving while black or brown. DWBB. What is the perceived basis for such a practice? Does police stress lead to police brutality? Explain. Does deadly force lead to police stress? Explain. How would you control police corruption? In other words, how would the police? Learning objectives. Think critically about the research process. So you can use critical thinking when you're doing your research. You can differentiate between prejudicial stages and inquiry stages of the research. Differentiate between primary and secondary research. Explore online secondary sources using various search technologies. Explore traditional secondary sources like books, periodicals, or reference works. We can explore primary sources, inquiries, interviews, and surveys, understand copyright in relation to research practices. Research process. Major decisions in the workplace are based on careful research, with findings recorded in a written report. These decisions require you to think critically about each step of the process and the information you gather for your research. Research process continued. Following the procedural stages of the research process, searching for information, recording your findings, documenting your sources, and writing a document. Research process, following are critical stages of the research process, asking the right questions, exploring and balanced views, achieving adequate depth of your search, evaluating your findings, interpreting your findings. The answers you uncover will only be as good as the questions you ask. Instead of setting for the most comforting or convenient answer, pursue the best answer. Consider a balance of perspectives from up-to-date and reputable sources. How serious is it? What does the power industry say? What do the media say? What does the EPA say? What does the Office of Technology Assessment say? What do recent studies show? What do local experts say? What do environmental groups say? Achieving adequate depth in your search. Balanced research examines a broad range of evidence. Through research, however, examines evidence in sufficient depth. There are 3 levels of information. At the surface level are publications from popular media designed to general readers. At moderate levels are trade, business, and technical publications designed for moderately informed to specialized readers. At the deepest level in specialized literature designed for practicing professionals. Achieving adequate depth in your search. Do research at all levels achieve adequate depth? Evaluating your findings. Is this information accurate, reliable, or relatively unbiased? Do the facts certify the claim? How much information is useful? And is this whole or real story? Do I need more information? Interpreting your findings. Once you decided which findings seem legitimate, you need to decide what they mean by asking these questions. What do my conclusions do to address my original research question? Do any findings conflict? Are there any misinterpretations possible? Should I consider my evidence? What, if any, should it be done? Primary research means getting information directly from the source by conducting interviews, surveying, observing people, events, or processes in action. Secondary research is information obtained secondhand by reading what the other researchers have compiled in books and articles in print or online. Combine primary, secondary research, start with secondary research, and expand on what others have already learned, and add credibility to your research by conducting primary research. Secondary sources include websites, online news outlets, magazines, blogs, wikis, books in the library, journal, magazine, newspaper articles, government publications, and other public records. Web-based secondary sources. To find various sites on the web, use 2 basic tools: subject directories and search engines. Subject directories are indexes compiled of editors useful links. Search engines like Yahoo, Google scan for websites containing keywords. When using search engines, be sure to adequately refine your search to avoid many results. Web-based secondary sources. Wikipedia is a popular web-based source, but uses only starting point, as Wikipedia is not peer-reviewed or contains many errors. Other web-based secondary sources include general, commercial. They have academic websites, government websites, online news outlets, and magazines. Blogs, wikis, internet forums, electronic mailing lists, e-libraries, and periodical databases. When conducting online, keep the following guidelines in mind. Expect limited results from any one search engine or subject directory. When using search engines, select keywords or general phrases that are varied and technical rather than general. When using Wikipedia or online encyclopedias, check out footnotes and other citations. Consider domain name type. where site originates. Identify one's purpose and sponsor. Use bookmarks and hot lists for quick access to favorite websites. Save or print what you need before it changes or disappears, and download what you need. Use it ethically, obtain permission, and credit your sources. Traditional secondary sources. Traditional secondary research tools are great value. Most hard copy secondary sources are carefully reviewed and edited before they're published. Locate hard copy sources by using your library's online public data catalog. Traditional secondary sources, including books and periodicals, reference works, government publications, gray literature, pamphlets, brochures, and other documents not found in the library, which may be useful. Exploring primary sources. Primary sources include unsolicited inquiries, informational interviews, surveys, observations, and experiments. Unsolicited inquiries include letters, phone calls or emails, inquiries to experts or others to clarify supplemental information you already have. Informational interviews allow you to talk with the expert on your subject and cover more in-depth information unsolicited inquiries can. When conducting interviews, plan and prepare ahead. Be courteous, avoid loaded questions, and listen actively and take notes. Surveys allow you to achieve a wider range of viewpoints by sending survey questionnaires to a sample group of people within a target population. When conducting a survey, keep the questionnaire short. Ask questions that can be tabulated and keep your questions unbiased and ambiguous. Observation experiments allow you to uncover your information by making site visits or conducting controlled tests. When conducting observations experiments, follow a careful plan, try to avoid bias, record accurately and completely. And then here's some research questions. What are the 4 procedural stages of the research process? What are 5 critical thinking stages in the research process? What are 3 levels of depth in the research process? What's the difference between evaluating findings, interpreting findings? What are primary and secondary research? And then what are 2 ways of locating web-based secondary sources? What cautions could observe when using Google, Wikipedia? What are 5 other web-based secondary sources? What tools should use to locate traditional secondary sources in the library? What are 4 types of primary sources? So we have begging the question. Here's a version of a simple example of begging the question, a fairly silly one, but one that makes the point clearly, and we'll return to it later. 2 gold miners roll a boulder away from the resting place and find 3 huge gold nuggets underneath. One says to the other, "Great, that's a nugget for you and me," handing 1 nugget to his associate. "Wait a minute," says the miner. "Why do you get 2 and I just get 1? "Because I'm the leader of this operation," says the first one. "What makes you the leader?" asked the miner to the 2. "I've got twice the gold that you do," answers the miner to 1. Getting really worked up over ideas. Not long ago, the editor of Free Thought Today magazine won a court case upholding the constitutional separation of church and state. Following are a few samples of the mail she received as a result. There's much more. As they were printed in the magazine, we present them to remind you of how worked up people can get over ideas. Satan worshiping scum. If you don't like this country and it was founded, and you get the F out of here and go straight to hell. F you communist beep. If you think mathematical precision is governs the universe established by random events, you truly are not a class of idiot that cannot be amply defined. These remarks illustrate extreme versions of more than one rhetorical device mentioned in this part of the book. They serve as a reminder that some people become defensive and emotional when it comes to religion. As Richard Dawkins, the professor of public understanding and science at Oxford University, prompted the remark, a philosophical opinion about the nature of the universe, which is held by a great majority of Americans' top scientists and probably the elite intelligence generally, it's apparent that the American electorate is no candidate for popular election dare affirm it in public. All right, we're begging the question. Oh, it's time for us to take our 10-minute break. Okay, 10-minute break. Okay. Time for us to watch a video. Uh-oh, sorry guys. Working right now. Difficulty. Okay, let's think about encouraging critical thinking with these 3 questions. Time for a video.
I am a professional teacher evaluator. And for the past 15 years, I've been traveling throughout the United States and China, trying to answer the not so easy question of how do we make our teachers better. And on a series of recent school visits here in China, school leaders asked me how their teachers could further creative thinking and creativity in their classes. They wanted to address the claim that their students were mostly rote learners. And as the claim goes, that beyond the memorization of facts and figures, their students really didn't have the opportunity to put this knowledge to use outside of the classroom. Now, they've heard that in the West, their Western counterparts have smaller classes. Maybe there is more opportunities for group interaction. And students there have an opportunity to pursue topics that are of genuine interest to them. And so school leaders are now looking for ways to inject new teaching methodologies into the Chinese classroom. And as a teacher evaluator, there are certain things that I look for whenever I observe a class. One thing that I look for in particular are the types of questions that teachers ask. Questions are a way of bringing the textbook material to life. They're a way of directly engaging the students and making sure that the students stay on task. They're also a way to check for understanding, to make sure that the students are actually absorbing what they're supposed to be learning. But not all questions are created equally. Take a look at this pair of questions here. The first one, question A, reads, "Do you know what climate change is?" And the second one, question B, reads, "What are 3 causes of climate change?" Now, which one of these questions better assesses student learning? If you said B, you're right. Question B requires you to possess a specific type of knowledge in order to answer this question. Either you have this information or you don't. And so let's go ahead, and this time we'll add another question into the mix. Take a look at question C. Why do some claim that climate change is the biggest crisis facing this generation? Now, which one of these better assesses student learning? Well, this question may be a little more difficult than the previous one because they both can. And so the former assesses student knowledge, while the latter gives students an opportunity to think of the consequences of an impending disaster. And so in the ideal class, students would first ask, or teachers rather, would first ask question B to establish the foundation knowledge. And then they would ask question C to give students an opportunity to use this knowledge. Now, think back to when you guys were in school, and I know for many of us this may be a difficult, painful experience. But think for a second if your teacher only asked you questions like question B. Well, this might be great for, trivia contests, but we would never get an opportunity to use or put this knowledge to good use. And think about for a second if your teacher only asked you questions like question C, and these are pretty difficult questions. This might serve to frustrate your learning, and maybe you'd be tempted to give up before you even get started. Now, back to the observations. I went on these teacher observations recently, and we saw different classes, but I noticed that there was something in particular that was lacking. And while the teachers were certainly well prepared, and there was a lot of engagement going on in the classes, an overwhelming 90% of the questions that were asked were of lower order question types. In other words, they looked more like question B. And in 3 of those classes, not one single higher order question was even asked. And so, how does this even happen? Well, asking higher order questions is the key to stimulating critical thinking. And we need to be able to give students an opportunity to grapple with questions that don't necessarily have one correct answer. This is more realistic of the types of situations that they're likely to face when they get outside of the classroom. Now, teachers shouldn't have to bear the responsibility on their own. When it comes to something as important as critical thinking, then it's all of our collective responsibility in order to push students forward. In other words, when it comes to creativity, the door doesn't just shut when the school day ends. And as the parent of school children myself, it got me thinking about the following question.
Consumer Cellular, this is Sam. How may I help you? This is a butt dial. Well, somebody's butt. Just thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you can get the same exact coverage as the leading carriers, but for up to half the price.
We tried everything, but Charlie still struggled with math. Then another mom recommended IXL, a learning program that really worked for her daughter. We thought, why not? Let's give it a try. With IXL, not only does Charlie get extra math practice and guidance, but he's also able to explore other topics and skills he's interested in. So if you're wondering if IXL is right for your child, I would say don't wait. You'll see a difference right away.
How can we better support critical thinking and creativity in schools by asking better, deeper questions outside of them? Now, as we know, we can study easier questions, we can answer easier questions, and this is great for exams. But as participants in society, we all know that we have to deal with questions that are a lot more complicated than those found on a multiple choice test. In reality, right, and we can see here, real life is a bunch of squiggles. There is not necessarily a blueprint that tells us how to get from A to B. And so with this type of situation, it's important that we expose our students to a degree of uncertainty in their classes and not just wait until they have to experience it for themselves for the first time outside of the classroom. You know, these days we send our kids to piano practice at age 4, maybe soccer practice at age 5, maybe they learn English at 3 months, I don't know, it's getting earlier and earlier these days. But one of the reasons why we do this is to give students an opportunity to learn some subjects or to be exposed to things that they normally wouldn't be able to do outside of the classroom. So when it's something as important as critical thinking at stake, does it not also make sense to expose our students to these tougher questions earlier when the stakes are not as high? Now, when we ask tougher questions, such as why questions, it's a lot more difficult. And it's difficult for a number of different reasons. And one reason it tends to be difficult is that in answering a why question, students need to put themselves out there. There's a risk there. There's a risk that, well, maybe they feel they won't say the right thing, or maybe they'll be judged by their classmates. But we need to do a better job of encouraging this and instilling in our students the grit necessary to be able to persevere against challenging topics that come their way. And so what schools need to then do a better job of, because we assume to a certain degree that in school, students are able to connect the dots for themselves. In other words, we assume that they can take whatever knowledge that they learn in school and somehow be able to figure out how to use it outside of it. But this assumption is dead wrong. And in fact, schools need to do a better job of not just teaching students the what or the content, but getting them to how by asking more whys. And luckily, we all can play a role in this. In fact, we can ask better questions by inviting others to ask better questions of us. And here are 3 ways in which you can do that. So let's go ahead and start with number 1. We can first start with a what question, but don't end there. Remember, when we ask a what question, this is the starting point. And when we ask these types of questions in class, students get a little bit excited because it's one of these answers where if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, you don't. But let's take a question that we started out with earlier, and it's this one. What are 3 main causes of climate change?
It's the holidays, and Pet Supplies Plus has you covered with your pet's favorite brands, from food and treats to toys and oh!
Are you kidding?
Did that really? She just grabbed that right up the...
And so if I were to ask this to my students, students could easily find the answer by doing a quick search on the internet, or maybe they would review their class notes. But the point is, it would take little effort to answer this type of question. But asking this type of question is deceptive, because if you get enough of these right, it could give you this false sense of security. Like, oh, I know the answer, right? But as we know, our jobs in all of this is to move beyond the textbooks, because this is what the textbooks are for. And our job is to put some kind of real-world spin on the type of content that students are learning in school. So there's a way to make this kind of question a little more productive. Rather than just asking students the what we could do instead is have them explain or paraphrase what they learned in class. And so consider the transformation. We changed what are 3 causes of climate change to explain what the 3 main causes of climate change are. And here, by asking this question instead, students need to give a little bit more. In other words, it's not just a safe answer. They have to go ahead and take that risk and put themselves out there. So once we've established the what, then we can start making connections by asking a series of why questions. And so asking these why questions gives students an opportunity to connect whatever knowledge they have to something personal in their lives. And so here are just some examples of possible why questions that students can ask. Well, why is climate change important for me, someone who lives here in Guangzhou? Why should I, as a student, be concerned about this now and not later? And why is this relevant? And when students make information or abstract information from textbooks relevant, then they can see the value in this, and they start asking themselves, okay, how can I take this information and put it in my sphere of influence, and to think about how this could be useful in my everyday life. So once we've established the what, and then we figured out how to connect it with the why, then we can start the fun stuff, right? Trying to solve by asking the hows. And here's some of my favorite how questions that I like to ask. The first one is, how do you know? So in our earlier question about climate change, rather than just giving the answers, Students then have to back up their answers. So what are the 3 main causes of climate change, blah, blah, blah. And then you can ask, well, how do you know this? And by asking this question, students then cannot just get away with the easy answer. In other words, they have to provide some sort of evidence and to be able to defend their answer against some logical attack. The second question, how might your perspective be different from that of others? And this forces students to empathize with others. For example, if they're in some kind of debate or something, then this gives students an opportunity to evaluate the grounds of the other side and to consider their needs and maybe to find some common ground. And the final question is, how can you solve this problem? And of course, this is kind of the queen mother of all questions. It's huge, right? But in doing so, students have to synthesize all of their previous knowledge and be able to figure out how to make this their own and to be able to apply themselves. And by taking this huge question and boiling it down into manageable parts, this is a valuable part of the process. Now, what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, for you students who are listening to this is an opportunity for you to extend your learning past the exams. It's an opportunity that will serve you well into the future. In other words, you're not just answering questions for questions' sakes. You're doing it in order to prepare yourselves for the types of uncertainties that you're likely to face.
Hey parents, pay attention. Is your child still using simple words like good and like repeatedly in his or her essays in the 5th grade? Many parents don't know that writing training should actually begin in kindergarten. From the initial drawing to the 1st grade, I began to write a sentence, write a paragraph, and then the 3rd grade began to write 3 paragraphs. And then the 5th grade began to use dialogue and writing techniques. It is important to build a good foundation in English writing in elementary school so that you can better prepare your child for writing in higher grades. If you're interested in your child's writing skills, we recommend enrolling your child in ClassUp's one-on-one online classes, where teachers work step by step to improve your child's writing skills. It's not just about writing good essays, it's about developing reading and expression skills. Click on the link below this video to contact us today.
Auto insurance all seems the same until it's time to use it. With USAA, it's easy to file claims, schedule.
If you're a parent listening to this, asking better questions is a great way to help your student to review. By them having to explain content that maybe they're not as, or maybe that you're not as familiar with, they then have to think about how they're going to put this into sort of digestible pieces for you to be able to understand it. And it's a great way to be able to consolidate learning. If you're a teacher listening to this, think about how you could further integrate higher order questions into your classes. And if efficiency is one of the reasons why you're not asking enough higher order questions, then evaluate the sort of activities you do with your students in class. And if they don't go toward the goal of advancing critical thinking and creativity, then think about whether or not these activities are truly relevant. And if you're a lifelong learner, ask yourself these questions in order to test your assumptions about what you think you already know. At the very least, you'll be able to empathize with the other side and to possibly find some common ground. Now, you know, it's naive for us to think, and for me to stand up here and to say that, you know, just by asking a few more how questions or a few more why questions, that this is going to be enough to create the next generation of great innovators and critical thinkers. After all, it takes a kind of group effort, one in which schools collaborate with teachers and students and parents to create an environment where risk is rewarded and there's no fear of getting an answer wrong. But in schools today, we tend to reward the right answers and to penalize the wrong ones. And as Dr. Ken Robinson and other educators have noted, our schools are in danger of falling hopelessly out of date in preparing our students for the challenges that come along with the mid-21st century. And so if risk is something that we hope to promote among our students, then it's only fair that we allow our teachers to be able to take these risks as well. And by giving them a place to ask more hows and more whys, this models the very type of critical thinking that we hope to instill in our students. So if we can all improve and support critical thinking by asking a few extra questions each day, then maybe the most appropriate question we should be asking ourselves is why not? Thank you very much.
With great pleasure, actually, that I invite Dr. Michael West to the TEDxKC stage.
All right. So as I was preparing this, talk for what the world needs now, I was reminded of this old Aztec story, and the story starts off with the world on fire, and it seems like such an apt metaphor for our times, because the world's on fire and all the animals are running away, all hope is lost, and we have this similar situation now. We have a hunger crisis, an economic crisis, an energy crisis. We have half the world living on less than $2 a day. We have islands of trash growing in our oceans, and we have, this has to be a message to our youth and to all of us that we cannot live the next 100 years the way that we've lived the past 100 years. And so if you think about this world on fire metaphor, and you think about, okay, we really need to get our youth ready for this, how do you think we're doing this? I'll just give you a picture here. This is my class at Kansas State University. This is where most of the preparation of our youth is happening, and certainly in the most serious types of preparation that are happening. And you can see they're not really engaged. And there's actually like a real test you can do for this to find out just how engaged they are and how much they are engaging in these really important questions. And that is just to pay attention to the questions that they're asking. A good question is something that leads people on a quest. And if you pay attention to the questions that students are asking in this environment, they turn out to be questions like this. How many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? I mean, these are like the worst types of questions around. And it's not that this group is lazy and disengaged. I mean, this is the same group here. I don't know if you see the difference. So something's gone wrong here. I've actually done surveys with the students. One day we just set up a camera and we just panned it around and students could sort of give confessions and that kind of thing. And we got things like this. I buy $100 textbooks that I never open. My neighbor paid for class but never comes. We did a survey and we found that across the university they were completing 49% of the readings that were assigned to them. But even worse, they're finding only 26% relevant to their life, which is like a 74% failure rate on our part. Goes on, I bring my laptop to class when I'm not working on class stuff. And this was nicely illustrated in the fact that like her IM actually popped up just as she was presenting this. I Facebooked through most of my classes. And these last two actually present something else to us, a new sort of disruption in the classroom. And that is that there is something in the air. There's literally something in the air. It's in the air all around us, and most of us can access it from at least one device that's on us right now, if not multiple devices. Our students are the same way. And what's in the air is nearly the entire body of human knowledge. It's the digital artifacts of about 2 billion people on the planet connecting and sharing and collaborating. And if you could picture it, it might look something like this. It's like the new media landscape. But this is really just the beginning, because we're headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information on unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, on all kinds of devices. And this makes it ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish. And it makes exams like this seem really silly and out of place. This is a multiple choice Scantron exam for those of you who've never seen one. So this is... this is way out of place here. I'm going to make the basic argument today that we need to move our students from simply being knowledgeable, that is knowing a bunch of stuff, which is basically what we're trying to do when we line them up in these big lecture halls and dump information on them. And we need to move them to being knowledge-able, that is able to find, sort, analyze, ultimately criticize, and even create new information and knowledge. And we have to recognize that knowledge ability changes over time based on the communication environment they're in. And that's because media are not just tools. Media are not even just means of communication. Media shape what can be said, who can say it, who can hear it, how it can be said. And in that way, they also, in a sense, mediate relationships. Ultimately, media are what allow us to connect with one another, and they allow us to connect with each other in different ways depending on the medium. So when media change, our relationships change. And there's a great analysis of this from the television era from Neil Postman. Just think about what television did when it came in and became the dominant medium of our culture. It totally rearranged our living rooms, first off, right? We had to rearrange the furniture around the television. And let's face it, that's the dining room too in a lot of cases. So this is a massive shift in our relationships at home. And the conversations of our culture start to happen here. The conversations are controlled by the few and designed for the masses. They are always entertaining. That's how you keep the audience engaged, even the serious ones. So our political debates go from long, reasoned analysis to 30-second sound bites. The conversations are punctuated by 30-second commercials, and the conversations create our culture of irrelevance, incoherence, and impotence. Those are Neil Postman's words. And Neil Postman, in 1985, when he was writing this, he asked you to imagine you're watching a very, very important news program, the most important news program you can imagine. You're sitting there, and he asked this series of questions. So what steps do you plan to reduce the conflict in the Middle East, or the rates of inflation, crime, or unemployment? What do you plan to do about NATO, OPEC, the CIA, et cetera? And then he follows this by saying, I shall take the liberty of answering for you. You plan to do nothing. And in 1985, that's basically what you could do, because in that time with television, it's a one-way conversation. You have to be on TV to have a voice. You have to be on TV to be significant. And so it's really no wonder in a world dominated by television media that we'd have all these young people clamoring to be on stage, to be significant. I mean, essentially, when you look at this group of young people, regardless of how we imagine the project of education, their primary goal when they're sitting in this room is they're basically trying to figure out who they are, what their place in this world is. They're seeking a meaning in life. They're seeking meaning and recognition in a world in which, in a society in which identity and recognition are not automatically given. So they have to find it. And at that critical moment that they're trying to find it, they're bombarded with media. And Dove made this great commercial that I want to show you here that sort of illustrates this and the effect that this can have, sometimes the negative effect. Some of you may have seen this before.
Younger, smaller, lighter, fuller, tighter, thinner, softer.
So obviously it demonstrates the power of media very well, and obviously this new media can be, or this media can be very damaging at the critical moment when people are trying to find their identity. And this, of course, is one of the reasons why in our schools we've always talked about critical thinking. Critical thinking is like setting up that filter, that barrier to all this media blast that's hitting them. So critical thinking is very important, especially in the television era, but it's not enough for this era. In the era of new media, we need to go beyond critical thinking, and that's going to be my argument from here on out. So what I want to do is I want to jump into like an old classic on YouTube. This appeared in 2006, just to sort of set the stage for what this new media world looks like. So here's a hero for a mediated culture that emerged in 2006. He goes by the name of One Man. He comes home to Sydney from England, and there's nobody at the airport to hug him. So he goes down to the mall and he holds up this free hug sign, and he just carries it around here looking for somebody to give him a hug. And you'll see here, finally somebody gives him one. And so now it gets interesting. It starts to spread. Other people start taking up the sign. Other people start getting hugs. But this is where it takes a turn that gets really interesting. It gets posted to YouTube, gets over 40 million views, and then it goes global. And so there's these events still happening 4 years later, thousands of these events all over the world, and it demonstrates something really quite fundamental about this media, that it's a global conversation, that it shows how ridiculously easy it is to connect and share and ultimately organize these global social movements. But it also, we have to recognize that in this media environment, there's always the spoofster, there's always the commentary coming back. So here's the spoofster now.
These are really, really good. And they're not as smelly as the hippie hugs.
Some of these get really serious, like these spoofs that you see, and this is what's so interesting about new media, is some of these get really serious. And so you remember that Dove commercial I just showed you? You might have thought, isn't it ironic that this beauty company is making this kind of commercial here? Well, somebody has spoofed it quite effectively, and here's that. So 2 weeks after this was produced and about 1 million YouTube views later, the Greenpeace activists who created this video were at the table with Unilever, Dove's parent company, and Unilever signed a moratorium on rainforest deforestation for palm oil. So this stuff is quite effective. And of course, the point of saying that and showing that is to point out that this is not a one-way conversation anymore, and it's not even just a conversation. I'm not sure exactly how to picture this for you, but there's layers and layers of creativity happening all over the world right now that's coming into this network. And the only way I can really describe it is through music, because music has these layers as well. So I want to show you the story of Eric Whitacre. Eric Whitacre is a composer. He's been presenting music for quite some time. At one point last year, somebody sung a song on YouTube, his own song, to Eric. And Eric was so inspired by this, he thought, I could create a whole virtual choir. So what he did was he actually recorded himself conducting the song. He put the sheet music up online, and then anybody in the world could actually just join this choir here. And it's metaphorically, it's quite interesting, right? Because it shows how different contributions from all over the world can add up into something quite beautiful. And I see this metaphor playing out in all kinds of different places, even really serious cases. So this is the 2007 Kenyan election crisis. In the aftermath, 4 Kenyans get together and they put together this website called Ushahidi, which means witness in Swahili. It allows people with cell phones to report something on their cell phone. It gets mapped on the map and then can get sent out. These alerts can get sent out based on where you are to your cell phone, so you get the critical information you need at that particular moment. It created 45,000 citizen reporters giving life and death information when they needed it most. So then 3 years later in Haiti, the Kenyans actually gave away the software. Anybody can use it. So some students at Tufts University implemented it for Ushahidi Haiti. They get, you can see here, hundreds of thousands of messages from Haiti. Some of these messages say things like this: we're looking for Gaby Joseph, who got buried under Royal University. And they're able to get these on the map, and then people on the ground are actually able to get these as well. And they're not using Google Maps, they're using OpenStreetMap, which is collaboratively produced by volunteers all over the world. That's the map that ends up on the ground. And these people are getting these alerts through the Ushahidi system. Here's a US Marine Corps comment on this: it is saving lives every day. I wish I had time to document every example, but there are too many. I say with confidence that there are hundreds of these kinds of success stories. The Marine Corps is using your project every second of the day to get aid and assistance to the people that need it most. So that's what's possible. And then you walk in to the classroom. All right, and so this is what my classroom looks like. And I want you just to think about, like, what's the message of the walls? So it's not about what I'm saying up at the front. The walls are saying something too. So what are these walls saying? And if you think about this old Dewey point, John Dewey used to say that students learn what they do. So if students learn what they do, what are they learning sitting here? It's not about just what I'm saying, but it's also the message of just sitting there. And the message is that the information is up at the front of the room with the authority, that they should follow along. And the message of this room is pretty clear, that you should bow to the authority and follow, follow, follow. So of course, walls and desks cannot talk, students can. So what we did was we just created a Google document. We called it A Vision of Students Today. I just started the first line, what is it like being a student today? I invited all my students to join in. So we had 200 collaborators on this. And we just started writing about what is it like being a student today. And it's basically a critique of higher education generated by all these 200 students. So some of this, we did some surveys as well we developed along with this. And then the video looks something like this we produced. And you've already seen some of the images at the beginning of this talk. So you've seen a lot of this already, so I'm going to skip the rest of that. But here's another interesting little side story. Just like a month after we produced this, it had raced to almost 3 million views. It had been translated into Spanish, Italian, Greek, French, and Arabic. It was on ABC News. I mean, it was like this weird example of just how ridiculously easy it is to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish. And yet at the same time, I think this is a little misleading because it's technologically ridiculously easy to do these things, but it's actually really hard to do these things, to really connect with people, to really collaborate, to really publish something of worth. Those are actually, I think, really hard things to do. And they're not learning to do those things in this kind of environment. So if we're going to move our students from being knowledgeable to being knowledge-able, we're going to have to recognize that knowledgeability is a practice. It's not a list of things that you can just tell somebody, this is what you need to do to be knowledge-able. It's a hard thing to do. It takes practice. And the 3 things that I try to do in my classroom to make this happen, number 1 is you try to embrace real problems that I don't know the answer to. I don't stand up and pretend I know the answers to the world on fire questions that we have. We do it with students, so we bring all of them together to collaborate to solve these real-world problems. And we do it harnessing and leveraging the relevant tools whenever we can. And in this way, we connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish together. And ultimately, if we're going to solve this crisis, we ultimately have to recognize that we have to convince our students to move beyond just seeking meaning and help them realize that meaning is not something you find, but it's ultimately something you create. You create yourself, you create the world. And ultimately, we need to move them beyond the question of what do we need to know for this test and move them to this question of what do we need to know for this test, the test of our lives. And if I could return back to that old Aztec story to finish off. So the Aztecs had this idea that the world is on fire, all hope is lost, and so on. Well, it turns out all hope isn't lost. As all these animals are fleeing this fire that threatens to engulf the entire world, all the animals are fleeing and the birds are up overhead fleeing, and an eagle looks back and he can see this tiny little bird back by this little stream near the fire, and the bird is just hopping up to the stream, filling its beak with water, and then sort of fluttering over the fire and dropping a single drop of water over the fire. And the eagle comes racing back and says, "It's like, you're crazy, like, you're gonna die, what are you doing?" And the little bird says, "The best I can." And the eagle gets really inspired by this and starts swooping down and picking up water in his beak and flying back over. And some other birds see this, and the animals see this, and pretty soon the earth starts to shake as the animals start to flow back to the fire. And they start digging a fire line, and the sky becomes so thick with birds that you can't see the sun, and the water falls like rain from their beaks. And this is why we can sit here today and still talk about the little bird that saved the world. Thanks.
Their AI? Intercom's AI. The leader in AI for customer service. Learn more at intercom.com.
What is knowledge in the age of big data? It sounds like rather a big ponderous question just now. So I'm going to start with something a bit more tangible. What do you know? Do you know what this is? I'm going to give you a clue. It's the same thing photographed from both sides. Any thoughts? It's the shin bone of a young wolf.
Oops, sorry. The video's over. Back to the book. Begging or begging for. For begging the question here, you could ask the audience to accept premises that are controversial. So let's review these real quick. These are the ones we've been going over the last 3 weeks. Personal attack ad hominem, consistency ad hominem, circumstantial ad hominem, poisoning the well, genetic fallacy, straw man, false dilemma, perfectionist fallacy, line drawing fallacy, slippery slope, placing the burden of proof, and begging the question. All right, friends, that's it for today. Make sure you do your assignment. As always, you have an assignment to do in Populi. And in case you're forgetting what your assignment was, let me review it with you. Today, we're on week 7. So you have assignments to do. Every week you have your discussion and your assignment. All right, so week 7, you are to explain for your discussion what factors affect decisions in an organization and how do these factors and decisions affect stakeholders. That should be 200 to 300 words. And don't forget this week for your assignment, you'll continue to work with decisions with Kava business scenario and build upon your assignment from the week 5 that you started and begin the development to the response to the scenario. For the discussion and the decisions in Kava part 2, complete the following items. Read the decisions of Kava scenario and the supplemental materials, page 14 of the syllabus. You are Nick and your employer's organization represented by Chris, Nick, and Alex. Use your week 5 assignment as a foundation for your current assignment. Use the formation from the case, materials, and the course, dependent research, and the mission of your current organization. Remember, this should be 1,050 words to about 1,750 words in which you describe your rationale and your plan for implementation for the proposed solution for your organization to establish a greater presence of the Kava by determining factor affecting decision implementation of the organization and your proposed solution, evaluating reasons and actions required for the decision implementation of your proposed solution, evaluating the ethical implications from stakeholders' perspectives and your proposed solution. Don't forget, everything's due on Sunday. Have a blessed day and I'll see you next week. Bye now.